Um, really appreciate everybody taking time out of their schedule to join again today. As an introduction, I'm Matt Helmers with Iowa State University and the director of the Iowa Nutrient Research Center, and have the good fortune to help moderate the Iowa Learning Farms webinars. I tell folks this is the best part of my week. So I'm really looking forward to it today. Last week, we had Dr. Andrea Beisch. That was an alumnus of Iowa State University, and we are really fortunate to have another alumnus of Iowa State University, Dr. Angie Carter, here today. Dr. Carter said it's snowing where she's at, so we won't say too much more about the beautiful spring weather, and we'll hope that when she comes back to Iowa, it's here again next week. But Dr. Carter is going to talk about women's farm organizations, protecting status quo, or transforming agriculture. As always, if you have questions as Dr. Carter is giving her talk, feel free to type those in the chat box and we'll make sure we get them to her at the end of her talk. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Carter.
Thank you, Dr. Helmers. Hi, everyone. So great to see some familiar names and some new names here. As Dr. Helmers shared, I'm Angie Carter, and I have my email here. I have a chapter that this work that I'm presenting today is from. And so if you would like to read the chapter, I'd be glad to send it to you. It's not open access online. I need to send you an actual copy of it, but I'd be very glad to share it with you if you're interested. So my email's there if you would like to have a chapter and read more about what I'll be talking about today. So I am sharing a picture here of little me and then slightly younger me. I graduated from Iowa State University in 2015 with some of you. I was in the Sustainable Ag and Sociology program. Dr. Beisch, who presented last week, was actually one of my colleagues in the program, was a fellow student in the program with me. So it's really great to be able to follow her presentation. And I show this picture of me, little me, in the Iowa State t-shirt because I grew up in rural Iowa. I grew up in Powesheik County. My dad was a large animal vet during the farm crisis of the 1980s. And so I have long roots in Iowa. My family has long roots in Iowa, but I am now located all the way up there. I made a map with a star so you'd know where I'm at, in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So about a 9.5-hour drive away. And I start a little bit with this personal story about my family because this is something that motivates me in my work to study and to pursue equity and justice in food and agricultural systems, because my family in Iowa directly benefited from one of the biggest handouts we've ever done in our country, and the white supremacist policies that gave land to white settlers, right? I know a lot of our families, if we're from Iowa and you're white, your families may have benefited from this too. But these policies really shape the landscape we're working in today. They really shape our work towards justice and a more equitable system today. And it's important that we recognize that we're still dealing with their legacies today. So the Homestead Act, while we hear about it a lot at the land-grant university, we don't often frame it as the white supremacist policy it was. Right? It required the forceful movement and genocide of indigenous people so that white settlers could settle these lands west of the Mississippi and Iowa. And we know that these lands were not empty, right? We have a lot of historic information and contemporary stories and continuance of Native peoples in Iowa that remind us that these lands were not empty in Iowa. When my family came here, it was because people had been forced to move before them. And so I think it's important that we remember this, because when we're talking about the current landscape of agriculture today, lots of times I hear people say, well, why aren't there more diversity among our farmers? Why isn't there more diversity in our agricultural policy? And it's because the roots of our agricultural policy really moved the diversity we had on the landscape, right? We know that there was a lot of diversity on this landscape prior to white settlement. That it was through these treaties, right, and the forceful movement of people that white settlers, and eventually through the land grant system, creating the land grant university at Iowa State, that we have the agricultural system we have today in Iowa. And with the forceful movement of people, we also lost our biological diversity as well, right? And so the land cover of Iowa has severely changed. Many of you study this. I'm a sociologist. you know much better than I do, just how much we have lost in terms of our ecological biodiversity in the state. And I think it's important to remember that this has been replaced, again, through policies that incentivize really a monoculture, right, on our landscape. And so this is a map showing the swine operations in 2018. We know that in Iowa, we're really trying to battle against this monoculture, right, and try to restore more diversity when we can. But it's hard because even as a student at Iowa State, I was encountering the erasure of the original biodiversity of Iowa many places on campus, right? And this mural, which is really well known in the Parks Library at Iowa State, was something I walked by frequently. In this picture, you see, white settler farmers taming the prairie, this idea that there were not people here, that there wasn't already an agricultural system here. Really this erasure, right, of a lot of diversity on our landscape has incentivized and socializes us to just think about agriculture one way. And that's been really harmful for our social and ecological systems in agriculture. And so we're left today in Iowa, and many of you are doing good work in Iowa trying to create more diversity, but we're left with this monoculture, right? And as Dr. Vandana Shiva writes, the monoculture of the mind is replicated on the ground. And so those policies early on that incentivized Indigenous genocide, land theft, that incentivized certain styles of farming, today continue to incentivize the monoculture of crops. They leave us not only with a lack of diversity in terms of ecological diversity and biological diversity on the landscape, but we've lost the diversity of people on this landscape, and we've lost with them a diversity of ideas and stories. And so my work is really motivated in thinking about how we can work to recognize and reckon with these legacies that we are living with today, their ecological and their social consequences, but also work at the same time to try to change the system so that we can work towards a more diverse system that we know we need if we're going to be successful in the future in terms of climate mitigation, adaptation, continuance on the land, soil health, all of these goals we often talk about in these presentations very often. And so our ag system today, I don't want to offend anyone, but I would say it's become quite boring, that we are left with agricultural system that doesn't have a lot of diversity in it. I am picking on Grant Wood here, I know, but it's not only lost diversity, it's become exclusive, right? Our agricultural system today is exclusive. It excludes diversity in terms of ecological diversity. It excludes diversity in terms of Black, Indigenous, people of color farmers, and it excludes diversity in terms of women. And so my work primarily, I've looked at gender, but I'm trying to push and think beyond just a gender equity lens to think about what it would really mean if we were looking at equity from a social lens that includes gender, but then also all these other categorizations of identity, whether it's sexuality, whether it's gender expression, whether it's race. How can we work to create a more diverse agricultural system? So many of you are probably really familiar with these USDA tables, and I'll go through these kind of fast, these USDA maps. We have a lot of white farmers in Iowa. Many of you already know that. We also have not many non-white farmers in Iowa. Many of you know that. We used to have extensive, right, Indigenous agriculture and land management in Iowa, and we've lost a lot of it. And it's thanks to groups such as the Meskwaki and the Red Earth Gardens and things that are going on, Great Plains Action Society, exciting folks up at Seed Savers, some of the work being done at Iowa State that Christina Gisht-Hill and others are leading, that we're relearning, recognizing the importance, right, of the Indigenous agricultural systems. We also used to have many more Black farmers in Iowa. We are recognizing the importance, again, of raising the stories of the Black farmers that we do still have in Iowa. You've seen, maybe if you're a member of Practical Farmers of Iowa, they've been doing great profiles, right, of farmers of color in Iowa and the importance of their work and their story. But again, this just shows how our agricultural system in Iowa has become a monoculture. And in this system, women are not well represented, across different racial ethnic lines. women are underrepresented in our agricultural system. Some of this is just how we have been collecting data for a long time, and who gets to count as a principal or primary operator and who is not, and can you only report one? And so the numbers are shifting in this a little bit as we recognize the importance of, there are multi-decision makers on many farms. But women are not well respected or well represented in many of our agricultural institutions or many of our agricultural stories, right? We talk about old MacDonald. Like, who else was working on that farm, right? Probably not him alone. And I have really been the recipient of a lot of good teachings from many of you, and also these books that I wanted to share that help me reframe how I understand the social diversity in Iowa and in agriculture, and its connection and importance to the ecological diversity. And so some of you may be familiar with these books. I highly recommend all of them. I'm sure you can get them at the Iowa State Library from your public library on interlibrary loan. Some of them are out of print. So The Invisible Farmers by Carolyn Sachs, Open Country Iowa that Deborah Fink wrote, her ethnography of a county in northwestern Iowa, and others are more recent. But these books have really helped inform my thinking about why it's not enough to just think about transforming agriculture along gender lines or racial lines, that we have to look at a more intersectional justice when we're talking about a just and equitable agricultural system. So I wanted to share these books, and really leaned a lot in this chapter that I wrote on Jenny Barker's Divine's book On Behalf of the Family Farm. Highly recommend it, her historical look at farm organizations in Iowa. So in this chapter that I wrote that I'm glad to share with all of you, I'll be talking a little bit today about what we can learn from women's organizations in agriculture. I was really interested in how women are working to change agriculture, and some of you may have heard me present on this before. My dissertation at Iowa State focused on this. But I'm also interested in how women are often tokenized or co-opted as messengers in agriculture to protect the status quo. So to protect white land ownership, for example, to protect certain types of agriculture that we know might be harmful. And then I wonder what we could all benefit from, if we were to learn about how we could organize and support a more inclusive rather than exclusive agriculture, right? So one that welcomes not only the participation and leadership of women, but also everybody else that has been excluded from agriculture through our agricultural policies and histories. So looking at women's farm organizations, I was considering any sort of formal or informal group that had an explicit mission that it was for women in agriculture, for rural women. And some of these were historic women's ags groups. So thinking about the Iowa Porkettes, which Jan Jackson, an Iowa hog farmer's wife, founded in 1964. So really more of an auxiliary group of a commodity group, right? Advocating for hog production, pork producers in Iowa. I was thinking about Margie Geiler-Adlan's more recent photography project and her for-profit work that she's doing, trying to elevate the stories and the work of women in agriculture. She saw that And God Made a Farmer video that was in the Super Bowl. This is like 7 or so years ago now. And where were the women, she wondered. So she went out and started taking pictures of women in agriculture and started Farmer. And then I was also thinking about educational projects that are organized for women. So like Annie's Project, which was founded in Illinois and is a nonprofit, but is now national. Often Extension works with Annie's Project, providing educational programs for women. I was also really interested too in the wave of women's organizations that started in the 1990s that was really focused on sustainable agriculture. So an intentional focus on people that may have been doing more community supported agriculture, CSAs, farm to market programs, may have explicitly said sustainable or organic or, focused on food justice in their mission statements. And so this included a group of women in ag networks, which are called wagons. So the Pennsylvania Women in Ag Network, the Maine Women in Ag Women's Ag Network and the Vermont Women's Ag Network, as well as the Women Food and Ag Network, which is based in Iowa, is now a national network. And in this presentation, I'm going to focus on the Women Food and Ag Network, the Iowa example, knowing that some of you might be already a little familiar with it and might be a familiar example. And I looked at these women's ag organizations and nonprofits and educational projects through an analytical lens that's used often in corporate work environments to analyze work equity, like in traditional, non-agricultural work environments. For some reason, there's a pretty big divide between scholars who study gender and agriculture and scholars who study gender and work environments, even though we all know agriculture is also a work environment. And so this is an application or a lens of theories that came from more traditional, like corporate style work environments in which people were trying to figure out ways that they could create more equitable policies at the workplace that would advocate for women, for their success, for their leadership, to help them accelerate, promotions and things like this. And I'm applying this to agriculture. And so there are 4 tiers of this analysis that Eli and Meyerson, these gender and work scholars, put together. They said that some efforts or policies to try to increase equity really focus on fixing the woman. How can we get her the skills she needs to be competitive in the work dominated by men? So that's focused at an individual level, right? Through trainings. And I think we see like Annie's project and other efforts, training women in agricultural business skills and how to market their crops and things. Another individual level way that we see people working on efforts and different types of policy change is to value the feminine. This idea that women have unique skill sets, experiences, knowledge that they bring to teams, to work environments, to projects. And so we need to lift up their voices and their stories so we recognize the importance of their contributions. And so through Farmer, the example that I shared from Margie's photography, that's what she's doing. She's interviewing women, taking their pictures, telling their stories, showing their unique contributions to agriculture. But that's still an individual level sort of intervention. And then these last 2 are more structural level changes. So if we're thinking about how we shift the status quo, we need to be thinking about social structure and transformation. Just targeting individual level change won't be enough. Individual level change is important, it's great, it's meaningful, but if we want to change the system, we have to look at systemic interventions, right? So these are a little harder and they challenge status quo, so they might be a little less popular, for example. One is to create equal opportunity. So you need to remove gendered barriers that might exist. And we saw efforts towards this, for example, with Secretary Vilsack settling so many of these legal cases under the Obama administration, recognizing the institutional discrimination that had been in play by federal agencies that were doing discriminatory lending to Black, Indigenous, people of color farmers, to women farmers, trying to change like lending practices and making sure that they're equitable for all farmers, not just men, not just white folks. Another way that you can create structural change by removing barriers is just making sure all the people have access to the information they need. So thinking about delivery of information, thinking about who gets to be part of the knowledge circle. In my research, I saw a lot that people talk at the co-op, right? And if you're not part of the co-op crowd, you may not know the local knowledge in your area or resources that are available to you. And then the second one that's structural is how do we disrupt and revise the status quo by changing the logic of the organization, like just changing the work culture, which is, that's probably the hardest level of change. And it's important as we think through these that we're not just thinking, okay, so we're including women, check the box, because are we only including white women? Are we only including women who have had land in their families for a long time? Are we only including straight women? Are we only including cisgender women? Just including women alone is not enough. So you have to make sure that through all of these levels of types of change, if you're really focusing on transformation, that you're not just lifting up the people that already have the most space in the movement or the most space in the agricultural system, which in contemporary Corn Belt ag would be white women. So through these examples through Women, Food, and Ag Network, I want to show you some ways where we see these different levels at work. If you're not familiar with Women, Food, and Ag Network, it was started in 1994 when Denise O'Brien, an Iowa organic farmer down in Atlantic, Iowa, and Kathy Lawrence, a food justice advocate from New York, went to the UN Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, China. They came back, and that lower picture down there shows a picture of the working group who in the late 90s and early 2000s started the Women, Food, and Ag Network that we have today in Iowa. And they have created several programs where they're trying to work at these different levels of change. Their Plate to Politics program, they're working on educating women, giving them the skills to run for office. So on the surface, this may look like one of those individual level interventions that you're fixing the woman, you're giving her the skills she needs to run for office to be competitive, whether it's for a soil water district commissioner or it's for state representatives. But as you get more women in these positions of power, then you can start to assess, revise, change work culture, which is a more structural level of change. Another program they have been working on is Women Caring for the Land. I know many of you have participated in this program or been leaders in this program. So getting those material resources, the knowledge, the connection to programs to women, right? So for whatever reasons, if they've not been attending the meetings everyone else have been left out of the loop, making sure that you're tailoring messages for women through content and curricula that are designed for women. Their third program, Harvesting Our Potential, again, really focuses on knowledge creation. So how do you connect people that may not have access to what is it like to start a farm because they're not from a farming family, or maybe they are, but nobody told them because they're the girl in their family and farming's for boys. How do you connect them to mentors who are women who can share information with them? And importantly, pay both of those people for sharing their experience in this mentorship relationship. And then their most recent program, Growing Community Resilience, has really been focusing more on those third and fourth levels of change, how we examine ourselves as a majority white organization, what it means to be doing work in agriculture and agricultural justice right now. What does it mean to engage in anti-racism, not just as an ally, but as an accomplice, to try to assess and change work culture? How do we talk about and share these stories of women's experiences in ways that are powerful, that can be transformative? And so this one organization is working across these different frames, right? They're not just in one area, they're combining these in different ways to try to create effective programming, not just only for their members, but also to target systems change in agriculture. And this helps us get past this. I hear this a lot, like we just need to add women to our meetings and stir, or how do I get more women to my meetings, or how do we get more of whatever group we're interested in to our meetings? I invite them, they don't come. We don't have anybody on this panel, so I'll invite one. I'm going to help them, I'm going to empower them, like these really kind of harmful ways of framing this work, which is bad. Like we shouldn't be doing that, right? Instead, if we use these lenses of how you actually create transformative change in an organization, we know we need to involve them using those frames. And so that looks like work that anyone could do in their organization, whether or not they're a women's ag organization. Making sure that your work is rooted in relationships rather than just convenience. I need somebody on this grant or project right now. I'm going to call up this person I know who fits that categorization. Paying people for their time and expertise, recognizing that they are bringing benefits to whatever you are doing, engaging in different and multiple modes of learning and education, recognizing that we need to not just transmit knowledge through this one directional way, like I'm doing in this PowerPoint right now, but that we need to build knowledge together. So doing more peer-to-peer learning, like Women, Food, and Ag's Women Caring for the Land, like we see PFI doing in their mentorship programs. And then rather than expecting women to show up and try hard and lean in, we need to look for like who's hogging the resources in the space. Like how can we get them to lean back a little, right? So that we can listen and learn from each other better. And very importantly, with often good intentions, but it ends up very harmful. People recognize, oh, certain programs or projects people are doing for women or whatever group I want to reach are really successful. We're going to use that same model. So don't co-opt, right, or steal other people's models. Work with them. Work with the people who are already doing the work. Try to learn how you can do the work together in a good way. And then just basic material resources need to be shared, right? Like I said, fund people who speak or show up at your group meetings, but also providing childcare, providing food, recognizing that there are material barriers because a lot of work for caring for children or making sure your family's fed, this is still gendered labor in many families. Like make that easier, and you might see how that shifts participation in your meetings. And so I'm not supposed to go to that one quite yet. I think that's been my time. And so I tried to identify, women agricultural organizations, how they have been doing some of this work together, but also how we can do the work, even if our goal isn't to be a women's ag organization. Maybe you're just working with ag women and rural women. These are ways that you can work on transformation that could lead to real change rather than just surface level.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Carter. Okay, I'm formulating my questions in my mind. So I have a couple questions. That's I get to take my prerogative, I guess, as the moderator. But if you wanting a CCA CEU, email Liz Ripley at ejukums@iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today. So I have a question on your last slide. Even something like for a lot of our events, would it even be useful to put on there children welcome? So I mean, if we have events, just so that people know it's encouraged to bring your children if we're having a field day or something like that.
Yeah, I think making things family friendly. Yeah. I learned through my dissertation research at Iowa when Iowa State, when I was doing field days, that just by saying like you're welcome to bring your kids or your family members, they brought their next generation that might be inheriting the farm. They brought their farm tenants, and they brought, it just opened up the relationships, and these relationships are so important, right, in agriculture to bring more people. And so, yeah, making them welcome and then having support for them when they get there, that they're not stuck just waiting, that there needs to be some childcare activities or food for them, right, when they're there.
Okay, we do have a couple questions, and I won't try to do real quickly. Ann Johans is on, I think, next week. I think that was the next slide. So farmland leasing considerations and conservation systems adoption. One other note I want to make is that with Iowa Learning Farms, others looking for new voices in conservation in Iowa. So if you go to the Iowa Learning Farms website, you can find out more information about that. And
yeah, some folks are direct messaging me that you would like this email up again. So
email up again. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So Anna asked, are there certain days of the week or times that are most effective for reaching more diverse ag audiences? Yeah, I think it's just going to depend, right? You might try a variety of meeting times. In the work that I did, we had good luck sometimes on weekends, but sometimes on it's just a different crowd on weekend than on a weekday, depending upon when people are busy with their families or not. So you might try both. I think especially if you're doing it outside of school hours, it's really important to have that childcare as an option recognizing that people are going to have kids. And, you know, that's not just for women, right? Like there's men that are responsible for their kids in the evenings and picking them up from school too. So knowing that that's welcome, I think that benefits everybody, right? Not only women, but especially women. Yes. And folks, you're asking good questions, but just to me, so the other people don't get to see
Okay,
them.
here I got some other ones here that I'll read out because I think they're really important. So, have there been studies? I think this person might be looking for some resources. Have there been studies demonstrating tangible advantages to multi-perspectives being included in decision making on the farm?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I have to think about that. Um, you know, I think we're kind of behind in our social science and agriculture. Kind of behind is maybe an understatement and putting it nicely. And we've only begin to recognize that it's not only the farmer who's involved in the decision making, or that the farmer is the man, right? So we're catching up. So recognizing that there's often co-owners and co-farmers who may be spouses or brothers or sisters, that there's landowners, that there's different generations. There's more work starting, I think, studying this, but I don't think that there's, if people have ideas or suggestions, I want to put them in the chat of other studies or resources. I think we're just starting to crack into this and we're a little behind. Obviously, this is important, right? Obviously, this is important. But the mainstream research into social science and ag has been focused on the farmer, and he is a white man, and that has been the mantra for a long time. So we don't know very much about all the rest, and we need to. This is so important, not only for equity and diversity in the social side, right, but also for the ecological side. Don't we want to get everyone we can on board with these messages for how we can farm with more care for our soil and water resources, right? Oh, okay. I see you can only chat to me, not the organizers, but I've got a couple more questions
They
here.
should be able to chat to me too,
Okay.
as a co-host, but
Yeah. Is there increasing diversity in agricultural education that is a stepping stone to increasing diversity in the industry? Good question. So I'm going to plug a paper that Dr. Beish and I wrote that's an natural sciences education. And if you're interested, I can send it to you. But this was a SARE, Sustainable Ag Research and Education grant that Dr. Beish and I did. She's at University of Nebraska, Lincoln, me up here at Michigan Tech, studying, you know, the next generation of people that are working in industry. What do they think about more diversity in agriculture? And we were just bringing in this question of women landowners. We weren't even opening it up as big as it could have been. And we found that they have pretty stereotypical views, that they're not exposed in their ag education to much other than the mainstream and the status quo. And so that really falls on us as educators, right? Like we need to be shifting our curricula, our examples, the farmers we bring in to talk to people to be more diverse, because that's a scary thing if our next generation of folks that are going to be in industry and in conservation are holding these same stereotypes that have been limiting us, right? We have work to do. So I'd be glad to send you that paper. Oh, Andrea just put it in the chat. Oh, let's see. Can I send to everyone? Not sure that I can.
Be able to copy and send it to everyone, or Andrea could send it, or somebody could send it to me, and I'll figure it out.
Everyone in meeting. I'm going to put it in the chat.
There we go.
Here it is.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
There we go. Okay, great. Okay, maybe I can get another one in here. Is there work among women landowners to upset the imbalance of who owns and works the land? To this person, it seems like the challenge is access to land. The pattern is toward larger and larger farms. Land ownership is a power of sorts, and the power gets concentrated in fewer hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the problem, right? I mean, this started with the Homestead Act and it's continuing today, and it's getting more and more consolidated in certain hands, and it's white folks, right? People get really sensitive though. We start talking about changing the structure of the family farm. We have a whole mythology around this. What it means to be a farmer is to own land. But I think we see groups like SILT, right? The Sustainable Iowa Land Trust. We see groups, we see landowners who are providing land through easements and other types of, you know, legal arrangements to be used in different ways. We see projects like, you know, I'm thinking about Hannah Breckbill up at Humble Hands Harvest Farm in northeastern Iowa, where they're trying to farm as a cooperative, right? We see people trying to do different models to create more access to land for new farmers, but also to stop this consolidation of more and more land in fewer and fewer hands, and it's just out of reach, right, for folks. So there are, I think, great experiments in this that are happening now. We need more of them, right? We need more of them. And we need to have a real conversation about what it means, to honor the treaties if we were going to really do that with our land management, especially in states like Iowa, where the land was stolen, right? And who's having that conversation? I want to talk with them. But these are things that we are behind on, and we need to catch up. I think we have to. Yeah, you all have such great questions. I cannot answer them all.
Another one here that I think I've thought a little bit about. COVID has been challenging in so many ways, but I guess have you explored the use of virtual formats in terms of attracting more diverse audiences?
Yes. So the Growing Community Resilience Program that Women, Food, and Ag started really at the start of the pandemic, out of we are in these intersecting crises. What are people doing in their communities? How can we support each other? Kind of a mutual aid knowledge exchange was online. And I don't think that WFAN staff would have done that if we had not been inspired by this crisis of the pandemic to try to find a way to meet with people where they are at and figure out what they need. And that modality has been really powerful because we see in these learning farm webinars, you can get people from all over. You don't have to, spend hours driving to town. You don't have to find childcare. You can join from where you are. So we have seen an increase in diversity through programs like that. So I think that the ways we've all had to learn crash course in how to be online and how to Zoom, this breaks down some of those barriers to accessing knowledge and connecting with each other for people, especially those who are working in agriculture, who is already a pretty isolating endeavor, right? Great question.
I think to me that also really hits on another need for enhancing rural broadband so that people have that connectivity to engage in meaningful ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, we need to make this work. So I see another question here. How do scientists move beyond the dominant narrative that a farm decision is made by one farmer, usually a man? What are ways to methodologically study a family or a community as a unit of analysis? Good question. Good question. Well, this is hard when we're just sending out surveys, because a survey goes to a person and they don't even have to share it. And we have no idea what's happened and they send it back, right? I think we need more qualitative work. I'm biased. I'm a social scientist that does qualitative work. I think we need more qualitative work because I think in some cases we are asking the wrong questions, and we've been asking the wrong questions for some time. And that's why we are so behind. And so I think it's really important that we engage more qualitative work in our research projects, do that in a really meaningful way on the front end, right? To try to get some qualitative information about what these units of analysis look like, because maybe it is a family, maybe it's also, there's really interesting experiments, like I said, happening right now with farmland ownership and how we try to create cooperatives or partnerships or collaborations. This is a business partnership too, right? And so how do we find out more about even what questions we should be asking? I think we need the qualitative research for that. Another person's asked about pronouns. Do you think it's impactful to include pronouns on name tags, or changing women to women with the X instead of the E to make the names more inclusive for potential participants? That's a good question. I think it's important to meet people where they're at, because you don't want to alienate people that can be part of this work, right? And so I think some people don't understand pronouns. When you just start putting them up there and asking everyone to do it, they might need it explained to them that, we just want to be respectful of how people want to be called. So we're going to share our pronouns, and, you don't need to make a big deal out of it. Some people may not. Some people may not want to because they're not comfortable sharing with the whole group what their pronouns are, right? Changing women to women with the X. I don't know. I try to use the same language of the audience I'm working with. What are they doing? again, trying to meet them where they're at with this idea that we can learn together? That is a good question. Mm-hmm. Yeah, another question. Oh, go ahead, Matt.
No, go ahead, Angie.
Another says, can you provide some examples of intersectional feminism in agriculture? We seem to be facing a dearth of this work. Yeah, I think it's again because we've just been so behind. I don't know why, but like I shared, a lot of gender scholars just don't think of farming or agriculture when it's like foundational to our communities and the social organization of much of the United States, right? Like we need to work there. So I think we're seeing that braiding or bridging happening now, that especially with the pandemic and the challenges with food access that many communities had, starting to recognize the importance more, engaging with local food systems work, not only in terms of racial justice or economic justice, but also gender justice. I think we're starting to see that happen now. Again, it's too late, but we can do a lot of work to catch up. I think a lot of it's already also been done, but not called intersectional feminism or intersectional feminist research in agriculture. Maybe it's just been called like indigenous agriculture, which is just inherently intersectional and recognizing interconnections between people and the earth and the animals and all of this. So sometimes it may not fit the categories that we might be coming from, but I do think we see it there. And Jenny Barker Devine, in that book she wrote about historical looks at women in farm organizations in Iowa, wrote about what she called agrarian feminism. So people may not identify it as feminist, but women were leading change. They were on the front lines of social movements in Iowa agriculture since a long time ago. So they may not identify as such, but she was recognizing them as engaging a type of feminism in their work. But I think the intersectional aspect, right, that you're asking about here, Jules, is the really key piece.
There's one here on any recommendations for how to build trust with women ag stakeholders in meetings? Some women may be put off by centering them as different than men. And how do we meet them where they are, but try to open the door to a new way of thinking?
Yeah, good question. And I've seen that. I mean, I think we need to start by recognizing that what is good for women is good for everybody. So like I said, having childcare available at meetings, you don't need to make a big thing and say, we are doing this because we want more women to come. Just say, we're just going to start offering childcare at meetings because we want it to be open for anybody that has little kids they're watching. Like just incorporate it as part of the process. And I think in adopting different modalities of teaching and learning, some people can be put off by that because we interpret the top down, I'm presenting at you, the expert model of knowledge as like, that's top. And if you're doing anything different, it must be remedial or something. And that can be hard, right? Because people have that kind of hierarchy. But if we just start incorporating more modes in our programming, and we don't, again, need to make a big deal of it, but we can incorporate different modes of learning. And, they may attract more women. They also may attract maybe more male landowners that don't know anything about Iowa farming yet either and want to learn. I do think, though, that it is important, and we hear this in our Women Food and Ag Network biannual surveys, to have a space just for women or just for Black farmers or just for Indigenous farmers, because we hear that our members in Women Food and Ag Network are members of many organizations. They're very involved, they're very active, and they still want a group of people with whom they can commiserate, who have similar experiences as them, because even in sustainable ag spaces, we often discount people who are not white, straight men. We often do, even in sustainable ag spaces. So I think it's trying to integrate it in the things you're already doing and recognizing there's still always going to be a group that appreciates and wants at the same time a space apart.
Right. Dr. Carter, my one job today was to make sure you were done by 12:45 so you could get to your class to teach. And so with that, there were great questions. I really appreciate all the dialogue. I certainly, boy, what important information that we heard today. And Dr. Carter's provided many of those resources in the chat box. I want to again thank everybody for attending today. And please tune in again next week. Ann Johans will be talking. With that, I wish you all a wonderful day. For those of us in Iowa, hopefully we can enjoy another nice couple days of weather. To Angie, enjoy the snow, and I hope you can lift that last little snow up over the pile out of your driveway or wherever you're shoveling.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Good to see you all. Hope you enjoy the sun. Get off your computer now. See you later. Bye.
All right. Thanks
Thank
so much,
you.
Angie, for participating today. And